Welcome to the tutorial Adding Effects in Animate Pro. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to add effects in Animate Pro. So not Animate, but just Animate Pro. And if you'd like to follow along, you can see that I'm using the sample material from Pack 14. So adding effects in Animate Pro is mostly done through the network view. And we've taken a look at the network view in the scene setup video tutorial series, as well as a bit in the rigging video tutorial series. But for those of you tuning in for the first time, this will all seem very new. So I'm going to be taking a look at the network view in great detail throughout this video. So for those of you who have been following along quite faithfully, you could always skip this video, but I would say that a little review never hurt anyone, and I'm actually going to go into a few details about the network view, specifically in relation to effects. So the first thing you need to know is that effects are never added through the timeline view. I say this, but there are actually two effects that you can add, and those are the quad map and the color card. But as a general rule, I would say you would never add effects through the timeline view. They will appear in the timeline view, but almost in a manner that's somewhat nonsensical. So it's best to do almost all your work for adding effects in the network view. So if you don't see the network view, of course, there are two ways that you can add it. You can either go to any window in the software and go to this arrow in the corner and select network, and it'll bring up the network view. Mine is already here, so it'll bring up a second window that I don't really need. And that's the same for the module library, which we'll be using. You can always select it from this corner tab, or you can go to the top menu and select Windows and select either network or module library to bring those up, and it'll add those specific views to whichever window is currently selected. So the organization of modules determines the flow of data and how the elements will be composited for your animation. And let's take a look at a single module, a single drawing module. So I'm just going to zoom in here. And let's look at the dojo, for example, here. I believe in the scene, this is not the 3D dojo, this is just the flattened version of a dojo. So this is just a regular drawing element or a drawing module, and it has several different parts. It has the input port here. Actually, I'm just going to select this and grab it to separate it a bit. So its input port here is at the top. It's green. It's how it receives information. The blue port at the bottom is the output port, and that's how it transmits information. This little black triangle here, if you click on it, shows the thumbnail of the drawing housed in this drawing module. And sometimes they take a little bit of time to load, so let's take a look at another one here. Okay, so here's the balcony railing and the balcony, and you can see it's highlighted here now in the camera view. And lastly, there's a little yellow square on the side, and if you click on that, it brings up the layer properties for that module. And the other way that you can bring up the layer properties is actually by double-clicking on this module's layer in the timeline. So just to show you that they're the same thing, and this is where you would adjust all the properties of either the layer or the module. And lastly, you can also put that layer property in any of the windows as well. So instead of having to double click, if you know you're going to make a lot of adjustments, you may as well house it somewhere in your interface. So that was a description of the average module that you can find in the network view and its structure, but also specifically of a drawing module. And the reason that the import for a drawing module is usually green is because the type of information that it's expected to receive is position information, whereas the type of output information it's supposed to donate or give would go into something like a composite, and so it is slightly color-coded. So let's talk a little bit now about the composite. So the composite combines multiple drawing modules, their transformation, and any effects made on them together into a single flattened bitmap or vector image. The one thing that's very important to know about how a composite works is how it layers these various elements. So the first thing that the composite looks at is the Z depth of an element in the module. So anything that has a negative Z depth will be put backwards, anything that has a positive will be put in front. If there are two elements that have the same Z depth, then it looks at the Z depth of the overall module and compares them and puts the one with the more positive Z depth in front and the one with the more negative behind. If those also happen to be the same, then it takes into account the order that all these modules are plugged into its body. So anything that's closer to this green node, which indicates the front, this green node on the left side, will be placed in front of anything that's at the end or on the right side. So this is front and this is back. So for example, the door will be composited or placed in front of the birds. You may have noticed that these two modules underneath it, the right module and the display module, do not have outports. And the reason that is because any information that flows into them can go no further. So in the right module, if you click on its yellow box, what you would have is all the information of how to create any type of an export. So whether it's a single image file like a Targa, a PNG, a JPEG, you can render it out from here, entire image sequence, or your final render of your scene as a video file. Whereas the display allows you to see all of these images composited together in the camera view. And like we were saying before, you can have a display for your composite or the composite of your scene, but you can also have, I think it's still here, a display for a single element or a group of elements. So we used to have this Karate Rabbit display attached to the Karate Rabbit so that you could select the display from the top menu and then decide you only want to see what's going on through this display's point of view. So you don't necessarily just have to have a display for your composite. So now let's take a look at an effect module. There are none as of yet added to this scene, so let's add one. And because we use the blur in the Animate video, let's use the blur as well. There are actually many more blurs or types of blurs for Animate Pro. We have blur directional, blur variable, blur radial, but I believe blur radial is the closest to the one that's used in Animate as just blur. And if we look at it, it looks pretty similar to a drawing module, but in fact it's actually quite different. The way that you would plug it in the network view is directly between the element that you want to put the effect on. So if I want to blur my Karate Master and the composite, and you can do that by holding down the Alt key on either Mac or Windows and sliding it across. And then if you want to view what this blur is doing, you actually have to go into the render mode, this cornflower blue icon here. And then it'll show you. So right now we haven't actually adjusted any of the properties, so it looks the same as if you're in the OpenGL view, except it's anti-aliased. That's the only difference. So what we can do, just for example's sake, is increase the radius of our blur, and then close, and now do a re-render. And now you can see it's actually blurred. So once again, you can only see your effect through the render mode. And this is just so that you have a faster way of working. These take a long time to render. So as you're working, it's easier just to work in the OpenGL mode without having your blur or your effects present. So that's how to use one type of effect, but there are actually many different types of effects, and a lot of them have more than one import. So let's scroll down and try to find a good example. So I'm going to grab the highlight and drag and drop it in the network view. So as you can see, the highlight has two imports. So the right import is always the place where you would put your drawing or the elements that you would like the effects to act upon. So for example, in this case, it would be the Karate Master group, it could be the punching bag, etc. In the left port, however, you would have to put a matte. And whenever you see a second port like this, it's never optional. You always need to add that matte or that position information or whatever it is to make the effect work properly. So in case you don't know what a matte is, it's kind of like a mask. It's a shape that will be used by the effect module to modify the original image. It'll be applied where the matte overlaps with the original image, and sometimes the matte will act actually as a negative shape and act to exclude parts of the original image. So it all kind of depends on the nature and the editing properties of the effect in question. So for the highlight example, which we have here, we would create a matte that would cover this edge of the Karate Rabbit's face and any of the left side of his body here. So maybe the top of the arm, the hand, over here where his bottom of his leg is, the tip of the foot. So some type of a shape that we could paint on its own layer, so it has its own drawing module in the network view. And then when we plug that shape in here, that shape will actually be applied to this shape, which would be the Karate Rabbit, and it would turn that area where they overlap lighter because this happens to be the highlight effect. Another thing to mention is that generally, if a matte has an outline and a fill, those things don't matter. What the effect is really looking for is the overall shape. So, for example, again, with the Karate Rabbit and for the purposes of, say, a tone instead of a highlight, you could actually use the Karate Rabbit again for its own matte and just shift it over so that everything that's over here, so it's sort of shifted over towards the left, would be in a shadowy tone, and it would actually match the Karate Rabbit exactly. But you wouldn't have to worry about the fact that it would have outlines and have color. It would act as like a black silhouette or a tone on tone silhouette on top of the Karate Rabbit. So I'll explain that all to you in greater detail with examples in one of the following videos. For this video, I just wanted to give you a general overview. So just as there are effects that have a port that requires a matte, there are also effects that allow for position information. So let's find one of those. So the apply image transformation effect actually has two ports that require position information, or can handle two ports. Actually, it only requires one, but it can handle two. And we know this because these ports are green. So just like on a drawing layer that can take pegs that give position information, this color indicates that, once again, that's what this module is looking for. Which leads me into the next module I'd like to talk about, and those are peg modules, which we can see here indicated by the -P, as well as their green color. So peg modules control the transformation of elements, and if you remember back from math class, transformation means position, scale, skewing, rotation, etc. And it can do this all over time, so this can all be keyframed and animated in the timeline. The green in and out ports that we see in a peg module indicates that it can accept position information and pass it on. So unlike the drawing element where you have green and blue, we actually have green to green. So you can have a peg attached to another peg and then attached to a drawing element. You can also have one peg that controls many different modules. So from this peg, I can pull out another wire and attach it to another drawing element like that, for example. And then I can do it again like that, for example. So a lot of people don't actually know that you can pull multiple wires out of a port. So I'm just going to undo that. As well, one module can accept more than one peg. So I can unhook this door elements peg and then use it in the punching bag as well, like that. And that's how a drawing element would accept more than one peg. You'd have to link them one on top of each other, not have them parallel to each other. And the reason that you might do something like that is that you could have one peg control the position of your drawing element and the other peg control the rotation of your drawing element, and then you could animate those two transformations differently over time. So let's put this peg back on the door. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about is the module library. I went over it kind of briefly, but I wanted you to take a look at the different tabs that exist for the module library, and they're these things that I've been clicking on here at the top. So the one that we looked at the beginning was filter, and it has all the filters listed in alphabetical order. You can scroll down and see them all. But you know, we have other tabs, groups, things that you would use to make movements, such as like transformations. The apply image transformation modules exist under the move tab, for example. They're plugins. You know, this is all the modules that you could have throughout all these different tabs, also listed in alphabetical order so that they're easy to find. And you can use these two arrows as well to scroll through. There's a favorites tab, and you can add different modules into this tab. So to do this, you have to open up another copy of your module library in a different window. and then select the effect that you would like to add to your favorite. So let's choose color screen, and then you simply need to drag it and drop it in the favorites tab in the module library, and it'll actually appear in both now. So the color screen is there in both. And in this way you can actually see all the different tabs listed side by side. There's also several ways that you can view these icons in the different tabs of the module library. What we have set to by default is the view as icons. There's also view as list, and this lists all the effects modules of a specific tab in alphabetical order without their icons. Then there's view icons with names, and this shows you the icon of a specific effect module with its name beside, and once again it's listed in alphabetical order. So we're just going to go back to the view as icons, and I'm actually going to close this version of the module library. So I believe you already know that to take effects module from the module library, you just need to click on it and drag and drop it in the network view. If you want to get rid of it, you can just click on the module again and hit the delete button, and I'll actually do that to clean up all these extra modules that I put into my network view. So the last thing I want to show you is how to work with an effect that was created in Animate, but in Animate Pro. So I'm going to save this version of my scene, and then I'm going to open another scene. And the scene that I'm opening is the scene that I actually created in the first video tutorial, creating effects in Animate. So the effect that I created there is I added a blur to the punching bag. So I don't know if you remember, but whenever you add an effect, whether it's through the network view or the timeline view, it appears in the timeline view as a layer with a yellow star next to it. So to show you, I'm just going to add this blur radial to the network view, and then specifically to the balcony. So now we've seen it appear, and it's a yellow star, like I said, with the orange border. Here you'll notice that the blur that was added to the punching bag, and this once again is a scene that's from Animate, is actually light purple with a purple border. And you'll also notice that in Animate Pro, when effects are added, the effect is added to the drawing layer, whereas when they're created in Animate, it's the drawing layer that's attached to the effect. So those are some major indicators right away. In addition to this, let's take a look at the punching bag's blur in the network view. It should be easiest for me just to do this and use the keyboard shortcut O to find it in network view. So let's bring this back towards the rest of the group. Okay, and what you don't see here is that we're actually inside of a group. Here's the top, and what we were inside, again, was the blur. So let me go back there again by using the keyboard shortcut O. So inside the group, we have the input, which if we go back to the top, you'll see it's a little top node, and the output, which will be the bottom node. And inside we have the punching bag peg, the punching bag TVG, Toon Boom Vector Graphics, so the drawing layer. We have a target composite, and we have the blur effect module. So because this entire system, which is the drawing, the peg, and the effect, it's mostly just the effect in the drawing layer, were created in Animate and not Animate Pro, they're automatically grouped together. And let's find them again in the top view. I see they're all the way over here. So I'm just going to select the effect, then use Command or Control X to cut it. Then I'm going to go back to my network and then find a place to paste it. So that's Command or Control V. depending whether you're using Windows or Mac. So as you may have noticed, the blur effect group, which was created in Animate, is a totally different color from any of the other modules that you have in your network view. And obviously, like the purple star, it's an indicator color to let you know that this is sort of a foreign body. And if we go inside the group, you can see it's the same network that I showed you before. So if we go back to the top, what we can do is hook our blur back into our composite so that it's part of our network, and then we can use it the way we would any other module or group or effect in Animate Pro. So that's it for the tutorial, adding effects to Animate Pro. Stay tuned for the next tutorial, animating an effect over time.